Welcome back to the National Post Speakeasy. We're here at the Metropolitan Brasserie in Ottawa. There's a $112,000 Tesla that's caused a bit of a tizzy in Ottawa lately. What's going on?
Yeah, well, so this story came out about a year ago, but nobody noticed it. It turns out that the Environment Department has been buying $112,000 Teslas, $90,000 Mercedes, Porsches, all sorts of high-end cars for emissions testing, among other things. Now, it really would be news if you had an emissions test in a Tesla, given it's an electric car. But it turns out that we've been doing this for years. And we buy them, we test them, and then we resell them on the government surplus site, but at a massive loss. People have been emailing me asking, well, how much did the Tesla go for? Well, apparently the Tesla hasn't been sold yet. But when it is, I mean, you discount these things 20% when you take them off the lot.
Right.
And the government's point of view is that, well, we want to have independent testing. We want to make sure that the manufacturers haven't meddled with the product. But in the US, they don't do it that way. Mainly, they take the product from the manufacturer, they test it in the lab, but then they do road tests. They go to people and say, can we borrow your car? We'll give you a loaner, we'll pay you 20 bucks a day, and when you get it back, you've got a car topped up with fuel and an oil change, which seems to me to be a much more sensible way to do it.
Wonder why they can't just rent it, or, yeah.
Well, sometimes I guess the rental agreement will say you can't take this car apart, but there are other countries do it other ways, rather than buying the ultimate driving machines for massive amounts of money and then flogging them off at a discount later. And
then the Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna, was tweeting about it, and she tweeted a stock photo of her Prius.
Yes, she drives a Prius. So I think the idea initially, when the story initially broke, was that the government ministers were being ferried around the country in high-end cars. That's not the case. But it still does not strike me as prudent use of the taxpayers' money. So I've got a question for you, which is the country is now going to be governed a little bit differently thanks to things that are happening in the Senate. So
yeah, well, it's been an interesting year, a couple of years since Justin Trudeau came into power. He's been advocating for this more independent, nonpartisan Senate, and he's getting it in spades now because the independent senators group is now the largest in the Senate, and they've just come up with a new committee agreement that will make everything more proportional, so more independents will chair committees, more independents will be deciding which bills to study and where and how, and you're kind of seeing now how this nonpartisanship affects the Senate.
And for the government, it adds a degree of uncertainty. I mean, it seems to me that if you want to oppose a bill, you don't bother talking to the Conservative parties, you don't lobby them, you talk to all these independent senators, right?
Yeah, and we've been looking at the lobbying statistics, and it's just skyrocketed over the last couple of years. Special interest groups are going to senators more often. Individual government ministers are also lobbying senators more often, asking them to support certain bills or vote a certain way. So you're definitely seeing a little bit of uncertainty on the part of the government, wondering whether those key bills are going to pass unamended.
And the key bills being?
We're looking at the marijuana bill, for example, coming up, and drug-impaired driving. A lot of changes were suggested in the House that were, not passed because of the Liberal majority, and so now we're going to see whether the senators want to maybe bring that up and have a bit of a battle between the House and Senate. It'll be fun to watch.
Sure. The other thing that's happened recently is the passage of the Magnitsky Act and its impact on sanctions on people who we as a country don't think are behaving particularly well overseas. So that's another bit of news this week. Canada is about to put out, or will have maybe put out, the first tranche of Magnitsky sanctions. These are against people who we consider to be human rights violators abroad. First sanctions are going against Venezuelans and Russians, the Venezuelan regime, of course, coming under a lot of criticism from Canada. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us again at the National Post Speakeasy. We'll see you next time.